Not sure if you can hear that, but that is a ton coming out the exhaust. Welcome back to the Lost Cause Ranch. And today we are playing with what is quite a special Land Rover engine. That Callaway name right there, usually not associated with Land Rover. I think that's a bit more of a Corvette thing. I mean, I guess we got a Corvette engine in this Land Rover, so we'll tie a little more of that heritage into another Land Rover. That is right, we have a neat project in store for this 4.6 liter, but a Callaway Land Rover. What's the deal with that? So it is the late 90s, and you are one of the go-to Corvette tuning experts. But every occasion is not a Corvette occasion, and sometimes you just need a nice performance luxury SUV, and this is well before the time of the Lamborghini Urus, Bentley Bentayga, Audi SQ8, and whatever that Ferrari thing is. Long before performance luxury SUVs were a thing, along came the Callaway Range Rover. With the heart of that P38 being this 4.6 liter engine. I believe there was just 250 of those made. And funny enough, here at the ranch, we got our hands on one. Not intentionally, but more of that story a little bit later. These Callaway Rover V8s had a different intake manifold, higher compression ratio via shaved down heads, along with some porting done on the manifold and the cylinder heads, which bumped the horsepower rating to a whopping 240 of them. They also had a cool carbon fiber intake, which I do not have. If you know one, you know a guy that wants one. I'm that guy. But like I said, this is earmarked for a certain Land Rover we have here. So we are going to freshen this guy up, including head gaskets, studs, and just checking everything out. I also want to get in there and see what kind of work Callaway did to the cylinder heads. Just curious. Haven't had the opportunity to pull one of these apart before. So today is that day where you guys get to see, right along with me, what's inside this neat Callaway Range Rover V8. We don't have a history on this engine. It's kind of a unique story. So before we tear it down, I think we should get a baseline engine health status via a cylinder leak down test. That's going to give us a good idea of the overall health. And if this checks out, we're going to be able to leave the lower end in place. Those are on there. But by the looks of them, I don't think we're going to have to worry about damaging them. Pulling them off. Well, it's looking promising so far. Plugs look pretty decent. Fuck. Well, that's not great. Well, seems like we got some of that bad stuck engine juju. This guy was stored over back by the Nada. And some of you may remember that ordeal. Block of wood so we can try and save the pistons. I don't want to, like, purposely damage them. So let's hope for better. We threw some transmission fluid in there. I'll throw a little vinegar in there and we'll see what we're dealing with. Well, in some potentially good news, I just went to the rear of the engine to use this guy to pry on the crankshaft so I could swing it in both directions to try and free it up. And it looks like the junkyard ran the bolts right into the back of the block. Yes, I said junkyard. That is where we got this engine. Let me loosen those guys up, see if this turns. Then we'll get into the story on purchasing this guy. They were rammed in there pretty good. You would not believe how much better that turns without some bolts impacted into the back of the block. That is a major relief. I thought we were gonna have another stuck piston disaster. The last one took a little bit of force to get freed up. Unfortunately, I believe this is going to need more than just a ring job. Thankfully, this one's not. But like I said, as you can see with the cran numbers and the flywheel bolts impacted into the back of the block, this was a junkyard engine, and we didn't even mean to buy it. So a few years ago, I had a 2004 Discovery with slipped liners, as they do. What we wanted to do with that is replace it with a Range Rover 4.6 for a little better engine. So went online, found one at a junkyard 150 miles away from us, called them up, ordered it, told them to freight it our way. A few short days later, we get an engine all wrapped up, park it to the side for a minute. A couple days later, unwrap that engine. And what do we find? A fancy little name on top of that engine. So we were able to stumble across a nice, rare Callaway engine in a random junkyard in southern Illinois. It was unfortunate that Range Rover met its demise, but I'm not going to complain too much about that. As you can see, once this showed up, we decided to find a different 4.6 liter Range Rover engine to swap into that Discovery and stuff this one aside for a future project, because this is too cool to just do a stock for stock swap into a Discovery. So a cylinder leak down test is a little more in-depth than, say, a normal compression test. Those of you not familiar with it, you take compressed air out of your shop compressor and you actually inject it into the cylinder, and then you have 2 gauges, and in our instance we'll run our inlet pressure up to 100 psi. Then the drop on the cylinder side indicates our leakage. So say we have 100 psi going in and this has 96 psi, we would have 4% leakage. 4% would be a good healthy engine. This engine has been sitting for a couple years, so without lubrication, without turning over, we're hoping to be under 15% leakage, and I would be happy with that because it'll most likely come back to a healthy rate with some usage. We test each cylinder with the piston at top dead center, so that is done, and then we go ahead and hold the crank, because if you were to put 100 psi into the cylinder, it would just shoot the piston to the bottom. And we want to measure at top dead center where the compression actually happens, because you could have a ridge worn in the cylinder wall at that point. So you want to know what the leakage is, where it really matters. So for some reason, and it might be the temp and whatnot, our outlet gauge was about 3 psi off, so we'll have to account for that when we do this. So let's throw some air at it and see what we got. That's 100. We're probably about 2%. That's actually on the phenomenal side of things. Granted, we probably sealed some of it back up again by putting the transmission fluid in, but we cleaned that out before this test. But still, good result. We'll check the rest of them. And that one's about 6. And what is nice about the leak down is you can tell where it is leaking from. So this particular cylinder, we can actually feel it coming back out of the intake. You may be able to hear that, but that means our main leak is coming in the intake valve. So it probably needs the seat cleaned up. 5 on that one. And there is where our current good news stops. That one's like 80% leakage. It's got quite a bit coming out of the intake. Looks like we're gonna have to check out some valves. Another 2% one. 1 and 2, way good. Not sure if you can hear that, but that is a ton coming out the exhaust. We're gonna spin it around once and try it again. Works way better, 2%. I should probably check the other side again. 2%. That one's about 55. Coming out of the intake. So we're back on cylinder 7, and you would not believe this one is at about 12%. Not the greatest, but not the end of the world. So we can cross that out, do a little 12%, cross the ouch out, move that over to this side. So we got 1 ouch, and that is an intake valve. Rest of them, passable. Actually, really good. A little disappointing on the one, but the good news is that is on the upper end. So it's gonna be on the cylinder head side of things. We didn't have any pushing through the dipstick or the oil fill here, so we didn't have anything pushing past the rings. So the lower end is in good shape, and that is the main battle. So I think it's time to start tearing this guy apart, see if we can notice the touches that Callaway did to it, and work on getting this guy cleaned up and refreshed. I am super excited to see what kind of tweaks were made to this guy. I think we just broke the ratchet. Still got a couple teeth left. Woo! And this one is missing. We won't worry about that. That's why they have all the other ones. So far, nothing much. We'll get this super nice harness out of the way. So there's our massive wiring harness. Think we can save it? It's all pretty nice. Gotta get them all out. Seam cleaner. Well, we're a little coked up in there, but from the little I can see so far, we don't have anything alarming happening on the camshaft. Just kind of a dirty engine. Unfortunately, we got our first snowfall. Good thing is it's disappearing. As you see in typical Joe fashion, the ceiling is not quite insulated yet. It's on the to-do list. We got everything but the ceiling done, but it's getting pretty chilly out. It's like I thought winter wasn't gonna come this year. So we got our little kerosene heater to help keep us warm. Normally we'd have Sasha out here, but this is her current status right now. I hate the cold, don't like winter. She hates it much more than me. Oh, we do have some coolant in there. All right, we left the push rods where they belong in order, and we're gonna keep them that way, so we reassemble it with them in order. A lot of times it doesn't make a difference, but in case anything's worn, we're gonna keep it worn together. A trick for that, Ted taught me many moons ago. Cardboard box, we got it labeled the front, and I have 8 slots cut in each side. So there, now all those guys will stay in order. I have a couple of the plastic divider trays that are designed for disassembling engines and keeping everything in order. You guys may remember the 2.6 liter out of this. Well, those parts are taking those up. Too many projects. First look after a little hose with brake clean, everything looks pretty nice. Cylinder walls feel good and still have some decent cross hatching. Can't complain about that one bit. Now let's get to the whole meat and potatoes of this thing and see what kind of modifications Callaway did to extract a few extra horsepower. So from my cursory inspection, here are the parts that I see have been tweaked a little bit by Callaway. And from the little research I was able to do, it sounds like they took the cylinder heads and took the maximum amount they could off to increase the compression ratio from like 9.3 to 1 to 9.6 to 1. Then we'll get them cleaned up and take a look at the ports. I believe they also port matched everything to have a nice smooth flow. So we got the intake ports played with, the intake ports where the cylinder head meets on the manifold were played with, the plenum ports were touched on both sides. So it doesn't look like any sort of major port work. Get a light on it here. But you can see the top there is a little shinier than down below. This would be the factory cast finish, and they went ahead and smoothed this area out. And then if you go over to the plenum side, they smoothed out the entire plenum all the way down to where it meets the velocity stack on the other side. So essentially what they're doing here is they are making sure where this meets this, it's a nice even flow, no lip or anything. A lot of people would refer to that as gasket matching, so there's no turbulence. Not exactly sure, but the velocity stacks seem a little shorter than I remember as well. If that's the case, that would change how the power band comes on. Shorter ones move the torque curve up. On the cylinder head, you can see, looks like it was just touched on this outer lip and a little bit more right there. And flipping it over, looking at the bottom side, it looks to be in pretty good shape. Nothing too alarming popping out right away. But if you look at that, that's pretty neat. The top side of the port looks to have been touched quite a bit more than the bottom. And what's neat there is they have the little divot machined out on all of the ports as well. Looks like they were matching the bottom of the intake manifold where the fuel injector sprays. So that's kind of neat to see. Right here is the intake valve on cylinder 7 that was leaking. It does have a little more carbon around the edge. than the rest of them. So we're gonna have to disassemble these, get them all cleaned up, and check out what's going on there. Probably just lap the valves back in and make sure all of them have a fresh new mating surface. And then when we get the valves out, we can check out the inside port, because supposedly they messed with that as well, along with the valve guides. So that'll be neat to see. I thought this was pretty neat. This came off the back side of the head, and it is a Callaway sticker, along with the plenum has its own Callaway sticker as well. So there's proof it's not completely off the shelf parts. And with the right side cylinder head, this was our worst cylinder that had about 55% leakage. Not seeing anything major right off the bat. So we'll have to get that valve out as well and see what's going on. So that's kind of neat to see what a company like Callaway does with their provenance in the tuning industry. Nothing I would say would be major, and it didn't give it a major power bump. Little tweaks. Kind of cool. I would say that helped everything, but the majority of it was probably in the ECM tune. It doesn't look like anything was ported on the exhaust manifolds or anything, but pretty trick to be able to pull apart one of the 250 Callaway 4.6s. Can't say I ever thought I would have had a chance to do that. So next up is getting all of this cleaned up. Then we have a fresh gasket set, along with what every Rover V8, especially the more modern ones, can benefit from. That's a set of ARP head studs. But that will be in the next video, where we get this neat Callaway engine all cleaned up and mated to that R380 5-speed transmission. I think that's gonna be a good combo. With that being said, appreciate you guys watching, appreciate you subscribing. There's not too many people that get to tear down an engine tuned by Callaway, even if it was only tuned a little bit. So that was a fun one, and we will be back soon with more high-performance Land Rovers.